The velvet interior of the luxury sedan still smelled of new leather and expensive perfume, the scent masking the metallic tang of the blood dripping from my split lip. My husband, Julian, the man who had promised to cherish me until the end of time, didn't even look back as he slammed the heavy door, leaving me standing in the pouring rain in front of my own house, the house his mother had just successfully evicted me from with a single legal signature. I was 6 months pregnant, clutching a single suitcase of winter clothes, while my husband's lawyer watched from the sidelines with the cold, bored indifference of a man witnessing a minor fender bender. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical pain, but as I stood there shivering, watching the brake lights of the car fade into the grey gloom of the evening, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle in my chest, a feeling that something dormant in me had finally woken up. The man I had married, the soft-spoken tech visionary who brought me chamomile tea when I worked double shifts at the hospital, was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And the real nightmare was only just beginning, because I had just realized that the emergency trust he had insisted I sign for our baby's future was actually a total waiver of all marital assets, a document I had signed with shaking, trusting hands only 3 weeks ago. 3 years ago, my life was defined by the steady, rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors and the smell of antiseptic. I was a night shift nurse, exhausted but content, living in a studio apartment that barely held my books. Then came Julian. He was everything my life lacked: stability, warmth, and an overwhelming, slightly overwhelming, devotion. He treated me like a rare artifact he had spent his life searching for. We moved into a sprawling, light-filled estate on the edge of the city, a house that felt like a sanctuary from my grueling shifts. I remember the mornings most clearly, the way the sun would hit the marble countertop in the kitchen while he poured me coffee, his hand lingering on my shoulder, his voice a low hum against my neck. It felt perfect. His mother, Beatrice, was a permanent fixture in that picture, though she always felt like a portrait hanging slightly crooked on the wall. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper words, a widow who had built her own empire from the ground up and clearly viewed me as a temporary tenant in her son's life. She tolerated me as long as I played the role of the quiet, grateful nurse. She would sit at our dinner table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the fine china, asking questions that felt more like interrogations. How much did I make? Was my family lineage sufficiently established? Did I have any hidden debts? I laughed them off then, thinking it was just her way of protecting the family legacy. I was so blinded by the romanticized version of Julian that I ignored the way she would exchange glances with him, a silent language of conspirators that I was never meant to decipher. I loved that house. It was the first place I had ever lived that felt truly mine. I spent hours in the sunroom, nesting for the baby, decorating the nursery with soft grays and blues, painting the walls with my own hands. I thought I was building a future, cementing a bond that would last a lifetime. I didn't see the paperwork as a betrayal. I saw it as a seal on our unity. When Julian brought the documents to me, he did it on a Tuesday night over a glass of red wine, with a fireplace crackling in the background. "It's just to protect the estate from the tax auditors, darling," he had said, his eyes filled with that practiced, gentle concern. "It's all in your name, but we need to ensure the legal framework is bulletproof, so Beatrice can't get her hands on it if she tries to challenge our independence." I signed. I didn't even read the fine print. I just saw his eyes, saw the way he looked at me, and felt a rush of gratitude that he was fighting for us. That was the last night I lived in that house as a wife. Though I didn't know it then. I was already being systematically erased from my own life. Looking back, I can see the timeline of my own destruction. The way he stopped mentioning his business trips. The way the bank statements stopped arriving at the house. The way Beatrice started visiting daily, carrying folders thick with documents that she would whisk away the moment I walked into the room. I was a guest in my own home, a nurse tending to a patient who was secretly plotting my cardiac arrest. And I had no idea that while I was picking out crib sheets, they were picking out the terms of my exile. The first crack appeared when I found a letter addressed to Julian from a firm specializing in asset restructuring. I found it tucked behind a stack of baby magazines on the kitchen island. When I asked him about it, his reaction wasn't defensive, it was dismissive. He brushed it aside, laughing as if I were a child playing with sharp objects. "Don't stress your pretty head, love," he had said, reaching out to stroke my hair. "It's just bureaucratic nonsense. If you start digging into the finances, you'll just give yourself a migraine." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The silence that followed his deflection was heavy, suffocating, and for the first time I noticed that he hadn't actually answered my question. He had simply redirected the flow of my attention. That was the night the first cold stone settled in my gut. I looked at the letter again, but this time I took a picture of it. I didn't know why then, but somewhere in the back of my mind, a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed had started to record the data. I began to watch them, not with the naive eyes of a wife, but with the observational eye of a nurse who knows when a patient is hiding their true symptoms. I started noting the hours they spent in the study, the hushed tones of their conversations that cut off abruptly when I entered the room. I noticed the way the gardener, a man who had worked for us for years, had suddenly been replaced by a private security detail that seemed more interested in watching my movements than tending to the hedges. My brother Leo had warned me. He had come over for dinner once, and he hadn't even finished his appetizer before he pulled me aside. "He's too polished, Elena," he had whispered in the hallway, his eyes scanning the room where Julian sat laughing with his mother. "Look at the way he checks his watch when he's talking to you. He isn't listening. He is waiting for you to finish so he can go back to whatever he is actually thinking about." I had defended him, of course. I had called Leo paranoid, told him he didn't understand the complexities of the corporate world, told him he was just jealous of the life I had built. I remember the look on Leo's face, a mix of pity and frustration that now haunts me. I was so desperate to be the woman who had made it, the woman who had escaped the struggle, that I hadn't realized I was walking into a gilded cage designed by experts. The house felt larger, colder. Every room I entered seemed to have a pair of eyes watching me, but I kept the charade going. I was 6 months pregnant, and my entire existence revolved around the tiny heartbeat inside me. I was the patient, and they were the predators, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final clinical stroke that would clear me from the board. And I was waiting too, though I didn't know it yet. I was waiting for the moment when the mask would slip, when the veneer of the billionaire lifestyle would crack and reveal the rot underneath. Little did I know, the man I thought was my partner had already paved the road for my ruin, and he was only waiting for the ink on the documents to dry before he showed me the door. The trap was sprung, but the hunter had underestimated the prey. I wasn't just a nurse. I was a woman who spent her life seeing people at their worst, and I was about to show them that I could be much, much worse. The warnings began as whispers, the kind you dismiss as the product of pregnancy-induced fatigue or an overactive imagination. It started with the missing mail, bank statements, utility bills, even personal letters from my sister. They stopped appearing in the brass slot by the door. When I asked Julian about it, his excuse was as smooth as silk. "I've switched us to paperless, Elena. It's better for the environment, and honestly, who has time to shed all that junk? I'm handling all the finances now, so you can focus on the nursery." He didn't even look up from his tablet. His voice had that practiced, soothing cadence, the one that usually put me at ease, but this time it sent a jolt of ice down my spine. Then there was the change in Beatrice. She stopped treating me with her usual icy disdain and replaced it with a suffocating, almost predatory politeness. She started showing up at the house unannounced, usually with a box of expensive pastries or a piece of jewelry that felt more like a bribe than a gift. She would sit in the sunroom, watching me decorate, her eyes tracking every movement I made. "You're doing so much work, dear," she'd murmur, her smile never reaching those cold, grey eyes. You really should be resting. After all, the baby needs a stress-free environment. Have you considered hiring a professional decorator? I have someone on retainer who can take this entire burden off your shoulders. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an attempt to strip me of the last tangible thing that made the house feel like my home. I noticed the secret meetings too. I'd walk into the hallway to get a glass of water at midnight and catch them, Julian and his mother, standing in the dim light of the study, heads bent together over a stack of thick blue-bound folders. The moment they heard my floorboards creak, the folders would vanish, and Julian would pivot with a grin that felt practiced. Just talking about the merger, honey. You know how volatile the market is right now. But the merger had been completed months ago. My heart would hammer against my ribs, a dull, aching thud that echoed the instability of my life. Yet I held my tongue. I was a professional, a nurse. I knew that if you tip your hand too early, you lose the game. The point of no return didn't arrive with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, devastating realization. It was a Tuesday, a day of suffocating humidity. Julian was supposedly at a conference in the city, and Beatrice was at her estate. I was in the library, looking for a book on newborn care I'd left on the shelf, when I noticed a slight misalignment in the mahogany desk. I had lived here for 2 years, and I knew every inch of that room. Curiosity, sharp and jagged, pricked at me. I slid my hand along the underside of the desk and felt a small magnetic catch. A hidden drawer, seamlessly built into the wood. My breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in the silence of the house. With a trembling hand, I popped the catch. Inside, there was a single, thin file folder. I pulled it out, my fingers clumsy and sleek with sweat. As I opened it, the world tilted. It wasn't a business document. It was a dossier on me. There were photos of me taken over the last 3 months. Me at the grocery store, me talking to my brother, me sitting on a park bench alone. Attached to the photos were legal documents marked pre-divorce asset partition and custody waiver. My blood turned to ice. Julian hadn't been working on a merger. He had been working on my erasure. And then I saw the bank statement at the bottom of the folder. My personal savings account, the money I had earned through years of night shifts and overtime, was empty. Zero. It had been drained, transferred into a holding company under Beatrice's name. The room began to spin. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. I felt the baby kick, a sudden sharp movement that felt like a plea for protection. I looked at the papers again, my mind racing to connect the dots. The emergency trust I had signed was a sham. The paperless banking was a cage. I wasn't his wife. I was a target in an elaborate, slow-motion liquidation. Suddenly, the front door clicked open. The sound of footsteps echoed in the foyer, firm, confident, and heavy. Julian. He was home early. Panic, raw and electric, surged through me. I didn't think. I moved. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of every single page with shaking hands, and shoved the file back into the hidden drawer. I pushed the drawer shut just as the door to the library creaked open. Julian stood there, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickered to the desk, then back to my face. He smiled, that same sickeningly sweet smile that used to make me feel safe. "Elena, darling," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, predatory register. "I didn't expect to find you in here. You look like you've seen a ghost. Is everything all right with the baby?" My pulse was thundering in my ears, a rhythmic, frantic warning. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the predator behind the mask. He was waiting for me to react, to spill the beans, so he could finish the job he had started. I forced my face into a mask of placid ignorance, my heart screaming in protest. I was just looking for my book, I whispered, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. I think the heat is getting to me. I'm just going to go upstairs and lie down. He stepped toward me, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to flinch, to run, to strike. I held my ground, forcing myself to accept his touch, even as it made my skin crawl. "You do that, love," he said softly, his thumb tracing the skin of my forearm. "You need to take care of yourself. After all, you have so much to lose if you aren't careful." That wasn't just a comment. It was a threat. He knew I had been in the desk. He knew. I walked past him, my legs feeling like lead, my mind already charting a path out of the nightmare. I wasn't just a pregnant woman in a house of secrets anymore. I was a woman who held the proof of her own destruction in her pocket, and I was about to turn the tide. I reached the bedroom, locked the door, and sank to the floor, the cold hardwood pressing against my back. The hunt was on, but for the first time, I realized I wasn't the prey. I was the one holding the gun. The lock clicked into place, a tiny metallic sound that felt like the slamming of a prison door. I pressed my back against the wood, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My hands were still shaking, but I didn't reach for my stomach to soothe the baby. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, my eyes scanning the photos I'd taken. The legal jargon was a tangled mess of deceit: sole power of attorney, irrevocable transfer of assets, temporary custody agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal malice. They hadn't just planned to divorce me. They planned to have me declared unfit, destitute, and homeless before the child was even born. I didn't have time for a breakdown. I sat on the edge of the bed and started making calls. First, I called my brother Leo. He didn't answer, so I left a short, clipped message. "I need you at the house. Don't come to the front door. Wait in the service alley. Bring the spare key to the storage unit you've been helping me clean out." My voice was eerily steady, the result of years of keeping calm during trauma codes in the ICU. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the one who had handled my aunt's estate when everyone else tried to swindle her. It went to voicemail, but I left a message that would ensure a callback. "I have documentation of fraud, asset misappropriation, and premeditated psychological coercion. I need a consultation before the end of the night." The door handle rattled. "Elena?" Julian's voice was smooth, deceptively gentle, drifting through the heavy oak. "The housekeeper said you didn't look well. I brought you some tea. Open the door, darling." "I'm resting, Julian," I called back. My voice didn't shake. "Please, just leave it by the door. I'm exhausted." A long silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him processing, calculating, deciding whether to force the issue or wait. "You're acting strangely," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its warmth. "Beatrice is concerned. She mentioned you were rummaging through the study earlier." My heart jumped, but I kept my tone flat. "I was looking for my book, Julian. You're overthinking it. I'm just pregnant and tired." "Open the door, Elena." The command was sharp. It wasn't a request anymore. I ignored him and began stuffing a bag with essentials: my passport, the documents I'd printed from my laptop, my emergency cash stash, and the small, vital keepsakes from my life before him. I was halfway through when the heavy, rhythmic thud of a shoulder hitting the door shook the frame. "Don't be difficult," he growled. "You know how this ends if you make a scene. Open the door." I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the lock. I looked at the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark, but there was a flicker of something else behind them. A cold, sharp hunger for justice. I unlocked the door and swung it open, not stepping back, but standing tall, blocking his path. Julian froze. He looked at the half-packed bag on the bed, then back at me. His face went from confusion to a mask of cold, calculating fury. He didn't even pretend to be the loving husband anymore. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning for the file I'd touched. "You found it," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. It wasn't a question. "I found everything," I replied. I held my phone up, my thumb hovering over the send button on an email draft addressed to his company's board of directors and the local news desk. "I saw the bank transfers, Julian. I saw the papers you and your mother signed behind my back. I'm not the woman you married. I'm the woman who's been documenting your every move for 3 weeks. He laughed, a short, barking sound that held no humor. He took a step toward me, towering over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. "You think anyone will believe a nurse with a history of pregnancy-related instability? I have the medical records, Elena. I have the signed waivers. You have nothing but a camera roll that will be deleted the moment I get that phone out of your hands." He lunged for the phone. I sidestepped him, my training as a nurse kicking in. You learn to be fast when you're moving patients. I darted toward the balcony, my pulse singing with adrenaline. "You touch me and you'll never see your son," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. He stopped, his hand outstretched, his face twisting into a sneer. "You think you can play me? You think your little brother is going to save you? I already had a talk with him this morning, Elena. He's currently at a job interview I arranged for him in another state. He won't be coming to save you." I felt the ground drop out from under me. Leo was gone? He had neutralized my only ally? I felt a flash of pure, white-hot terror, but I swallowed it. If he was this confident, he was being sloppy. He was so arrogant that he thought he'd won the game, so he was leaving the board pieces exposed. "You think you're smart, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I took a step toward him, forcing him to retreat. "You think you've erased me, but you forgot one thing. I spent years in an ICU watching people die because they trusted the wrong person. I learned to look for the things nobody else notices. You didn't just steal my money, Julian. You stole from your own company's offshore accounts to cover the taxes on the illegal transfer. You didn't just break the law. You broke your own leverage." His face paled, just a fraction. A hairline fracture in his armor. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice losing its steel. "You thought I didn't know about the shell company in the Caymans?" I lied, my voice steady, my gaze locked onto his eyes. "I know about the tax fraud, Julian. I have the wire receipts. And guess what? My brother didn't go to an interview. He went to the SEC with a whistleblower complaint I filed 3 days ago." He looked at me, his mouth parting slightly, panic flickering in his eyes for the first time. "You're lying." "Am I?" I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was inches from his face. "Check your inbox, Julian. The audit starts tomorrow morning. And unless you want to lose everything you actually care about, your reputation, your empire, your freedom, you're going to let me walk out of this house with my belongings, my bank access restored, and a legal settlement that ensures my child is taken care of." He stared at me, his chest heaving, the billionaire mask shattering into 1,000 pieces of fear. This was it, the shift. The prey had become the predator, and the hunter had realized he was being tracked. The air in the bedroom grew heavy, thick with the scent of Julian's expensive cologne and the metallic tang of my own rising adrenaline. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic thumping of my heart, a drumbeat of war. Julian looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, he didn't see a decorative wife or a compliant nurse. He saw a threat. "You wouldn't," he whispered, his voice stripped of its usual polished resonance. "You'd be destroying your own life too. Everything we built, The house, the future, the family name. It would all be burned to the ground. We didn't build anything, Julian, I snapped, my voice steady, ice cold. You built a cage, and you invited me in so you could study the expiration date. And as for my life, it's already been burned to the ground. I'm just standing in the ashes, deciding how much of you I want to take down with me. Just then, the heavy double doors of our bedroom swung open. Beatrice stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield, but the moment she saw the look on her son's face, her composure faltered. Julian, what is happening? Why are you shouting? She demanded, stepping into the room. Her eyes flicked toward the open drawer, then to the bags on the bed, and finally to my face. Her expression curdled into pure, unadulterated venom. Oh, I see. The little nurse decided to play detective. How pathetic. Julian turned to his mother, his desperation spilling over. She's calling the SEC, mother. She claims she has the wire receipts for the offshore accounts. Beatrice let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, though I noticed her hand clenched tight around her designer handbag. She's a nurse, Julian. She doesn't even know how to read a quarterly report, let alone access an encrypted offshore ledger. She's bluffing. Take the phone from her and let's end this farce. Beatrice started toward me, her eyes glinting with a dangerous predatory resolve. She reached out, her fingers hooked like talons, aiming for the device in my hand. Don't, I warned, stepping back, my free hand going instinctively to my stomach, a protective primal gesture. If you touch me, Beatrice, I'll scream for the security guards, and then I'll show them the voice recording of your conversation with Julian from last night. The one where you discussed liquidation, the legal kind and the other kind. Beatrice stopped mid-stride. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like crumpled parchment. You are listening? I've been listening for months, I lied, my voice steady as stone. In reality, I had been recording them for weeks, but I didn't have the recording of last night. It was a gamble, the biggest one of my life, but I could see the terror in her eyes. I have enough evidence to keep you both in court for the next decade. Do you really want the board of directors to see how you handled the estate taxes? Do you want the press to know exactly how a philanthropist like you treats a pregnant woman? You ungrateful little shrew, Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with rage. After all we gave you? We took you from a gutter. You took me from a job where I actually helped people, instead of preying on them. I cut her off, my voice booming. I took a step forward, forcing her back. I'm not the woman you brought into this family. I'm the woman who was holding the keys to your prison cell. Julian looked between his mother and me, his eyes darting back and forth. He was calculating the cost of my silence versus the cost of a scandal. His greed was his weakness. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the public image he had spent years crafting. Mother, wait, Julian said, his hand landing on her shoulder. He looked at me, his gaze shifting from fury to a sickening, oily desperation. Elena, let's talk about this. We can renegotiate. We can make sure you're provided for. We just need to resolve this little misunderstanding about the paperwork. Renegotiate? I scoffed. I walked past them, my head held high, and stopped at the door. I turned to look at them, the billionaire and his matriarch, trapped in the very house they thought they controlled. There is no negotiation. I'm leaving. And by morning, your lawyers would have a set of demands that include full ownership of this property, a significant settlement for the child, and a total release of all my financial assets. If those papers aren't signed by noon, the SEC gets the drive. You don't have the drive, Beatrice snapped, her composure finally snapping. I pulled a small silver thumb drive from my pocket, an empty one, a decoy I'd grabbed from the study hours ago. I held it up, watching their eyes track the movement. Try me. I've already sent the files to an automated server. If I don't input a code by 8 a.m., everything goes public. Think very carefully, Julian. Is your empire worth more than your freedom? I walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing on the marble, leaving them in the silence of their own making. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the sharp, frantic tone of their voices rising as they began to turn on each other, the blame game starting exactly as I knew it would. The hunt was over, and for the first time in my life, I was the one walking away with the prize. The cold, crystalline silence of the night air outside was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. As I stepped onto the driveway, my legs didn't shake. They felt rooted to the earth, strong and purposeful. The transformation wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, chilling solidification. I was no longer the girl who sought shelter in someone else's mansion. I was the architect of my own survival. I drove my old reliable sedan, which Julian had tried to have towed months ago, away from the estate, not looking back at the glowing windows that now housed two panicked, hollow people. The next 48 hours were a blur of cold, calculated precision. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to a high-powered law firm that specialized in corporate dismantling. My brother Leo was waiting for me in the lobby, his face a map of worry that turned into pure, fierce pride when he saw me walk through the doors. He hadn't been trapped in a job interview. He had been scouting for the very investigators I needed. Together, we laid out the web of deception. The shell companies, the falsified tax filings, and the blatant embezzlement of the estate's liquid assets. By the time the morning sun hit the pavement on the day of the deadline, Julian's world was already crumbling. The SEC arrived at his offices not with a warning, but with a warrant. I watched from a distance as the news footage played on a loop in the lobby of my lawyer's office. Julian being escorted out of his own building, his face obscured by a designer jacket, his mother Beatrice trailing behind him, her once immaculate hair wild, her eyes darting frantically toward the cameras. The fall was spectacular, public, and absolute. They didn't just lose their money, they lost the social capital they lived for. The board of directors stripped Julian of his CEO title by noon, and the public investigation into their family philanthropy began a tidal wave of litigation that would bury them for decades. The settlement agreement they signed, desperate to avoid a criminal trial that would reveal even more rot, was massive. Not only did I secure the house, which I immediately put on the market to be demolished and replaced with something that didn't smell like their greed, but I also clawed back every cent of my own savings and a substantial trust for my child. I wasn't just a victim who had been made whole. I was a woman who had walked through fire and come out with the ashes in her hands. 6 months later, the world looks different. I live in a quiet, sun-drenched house on the coast, a place where the only sound is the rhythmic pulse of the ocean. My son, Leo Jr., is healthy, thriving, and surrounded by the love of a family that actually cares for him. My brother visits every weekend, and we laugh about the insanity of that night, but the laughter is different now. It's the sound of people who know exactly who they are. Yesterday, I was walking along the shore when I saw a woman struggling with a heavy bag, much like the one I carried out of that mansion. For a fleeting second, I saw my old self in her posture. I walked over, not to save her, but to offer a hand. And as we stood there, I realized that the nightmare had been the crucible that forged my true identity. I had thought my life was ending when I left that house, but in reality, that was the exact moment it finally began. I looked out at the horizon, the golden light reflecting off the water, and felt a profound, unshakable peace. They thought they had broken a nurse, but they had simply awakened a force they couldn't control. My life is no longer a fairy tale written by a billionaire. It is a story written by me, in my own ink, on my own terms. The most dangerous person in the world is a woman who has lost everything and discovered that she didn't need any of it to be whole.